What up? It's your boy T-Bear and Reaction. Today's Wrestling Wednesday, and this is my kind of video coming from well-known wrestling channel video, Wrestle with Andy. This is what I love about wrestling. My side of wrestling. The baby faces, aka the good guys. You know what I'm saying? This is Good Guys Wrestling's best face turns. You know I love a good face turn. Right? I mean, it's as much as folks sometimes love a heel turn. Not sure why, but I'll always love a good face turn, man. I love seeing that, especially when a wrestler I want to cheer for, but I can't because I don't root for the bad guy. Jordan sound good. I love it. Most recently, we had Carmelo Hayes with a double turn with Braun Breaker. We had Seth Rollins not too long ago as well too. I'm really thinking Tony D'Angelo is turning face. Tony D'Angelo and Stacks is turning face too, because their little exchange recently has been a little questionable, thinking they're going to the face side as well too. Let me see who else recently turned face. Let's see. Bobby Lashley's back. Oh yeah, Santos. And I'm hoping they don't. Just because they turn face, they keep having to lose over there. And, of course, most recently, Sami Zayn, man. But other than that, let's check out next how Good Guys Wrestling Best Face Turn from Wrestling with Andy. Let's get it. Yes, sir. This moment here, yes. Like the shot of the tribal queen.
It's an industry built upon creating heroes who fans will want to get behind.
Yes.
That said, doing this is a delicate process and one which must be carried out carefully. And that's because, on more than one occasion, a potentially game-changing shift in alignment has gone wrong as a result of poor booking. But what happens when it's done to perfection? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. So join us as we take a deep dive into Good Guys Wrestling's greatest face turns.
Even Brock, he went back to his old ways.
And as always, if we're going to start anywhere, we really should do so with one of the
best
examples of this in action.
Yes.
Not only did WrestleMania 13...
Always said, this is one of the best things they could have done right here. Is make this man a good... Well, I gotta be careful with this because a lot of folks like to say that call a certain wrestler a good guy is a bad taste in their mouth, and it's fortunately he's one of them, but he was indeed an anti-hero babyface for sure, and this is awesome. The crowd was starting to slowly get behind him. Some of us like myself wanted to root for him, but he was still a bad guy. But when that double turn happened, freedom. And he had one of the best finisher at the time too, the stunner. So when this happened, I was so happy, and his entrance music, of course, was awesome. So yes. Best one right here, yes.
Marked the official babyface turn of a new top star, but it also ended up changing the course of wrestling history forever. Yes, while the rest of the card that night was largely forgettable, there was one match which saved the day that evening in Rosemont, Illinois, and it was Stone Cold.
Why they say 13 was a bad WrestleMania? I guess y'all got to comment down below on that one.
Steve Austin versus Bret Hart. Now, we could do a whole video breaking down the bout beat for beat and explaining why it's probably the greatest of all time. But for the sake of brevity, all you need to know is that heading into it, Austin was the biggest heel in the company, and Hart was the biggest babyface. That said, there was a vocal section of the crowd who were getting behind the Rattlesnake more and more each week on account of his rebellious antics. And feeling frustrated over this, the Hitman had decided to expose his rival as a fraud by forcing him to submit in the middle of the ring. On the night in question, though, like a true hero, Austin simply refused to give up no matter what punishment was thrown his way. And this extended to him being locked in a sharpshooter towards the close of the bout, all while he was gushing blood from his forehead. So unable to escape at this point, he chose to pass out rather than tap, meaning he'd technically lose the match, but would always be able to say he never lost the war. And this only served to infuriate Hart even more so. After the match was done, he'd continue to wail on his opponent, with this turning him heel and completing the double switch. But while Bret's heel turn would yield a lot of positive results over the year which followed, it was nothing compared to the historical significance of Austin switching to the babyface side of the roster. And that's because by the time WrestleMania 14 came around a year
Yup.
later, the Rattlesnake would be so white hot, he'd drag wrestling into the mainstream as he
Yes, he
kickstarted
did.
the Attitude Era.
Yes, he did.
Yes, with a single decision, WWF had effectively rescued their company from the brink of bankruptcy and taken themselves to greater heights than
Yes,
ever
indeed.
before, because make no mistake, if Stone Cold continues to be a heel heading into 1998, none of this happens. And if you want any evidence of that, you only have to look at what occurred when he actually did turn heel
Yep.
again in 2001, and the boom period came to a crashing end. Since that point, in fact, wrestling has remained in somewhat of a niche role, with nothing in the modern day truly being able to reach the heights of Steve Austin again. But even if that's the way it stays now, it's not to say there haven't been big baby faces who've arisen over the decades. And in the years following the Attitude Era, few of those stars were bigger than Batista.
Yes.
That's right, outside of John Cena and maybe Randy Orton, no one really personified the Ruthless Aggression Era more than the Animal. But he might never have gotten to that point had it not been for a perfect babyface turn, which took place when he gave Evolution the thumbs down in 2005. How did
Indeed.
this happen? Well, despite being the most dominant stable of their era, Evolution were starting to fall apart by the middle of 2004. And that was because, with Triple H, Ric Flair, and Batista growing jealous of Randy Orton's success, they decided to give him the boot. But while this booking decision had initially been made in order to get the Legend Killer over as the next face of the company, something surprising happened between that year's SummerSlam and WrestleMania 21. And this was the Animal getting over huge. So recognizing the situation and changing plans then, Vince McMahon instead decided to do a slow burn tease of Big Dave leaving Evolution himself, with this really getting going once he won the Royal Rumble in January of 2005. And since the Game was the World Heavyweight Champion at that point,
Going
it
his
started to
reign of
cause
terror.
friction between the duo. Friction which saw the champ make plans to get his protege moved over to SmackDown by challenging their world champion JBL instead. That said, Batista was too smart to fall for this trick, and so, realizing his leader was no longer behind him, he turned on him before the opposite could occur, when on the February 21st episode of Raw that year, he gave him a thumbs down worthy of a Roman emperor, then proceeded to powerbomb him through a table. Of course, it should go without saying that this got a massive pop from the audience who'd been waiting
Yes,
for such a moment
indeed.
to come for months. And while the Animal then went on to beat the Game at WrestleMania 21, it solidified the whole thing
Yes,
as
sir.
being legendary. But that's not the only time someone in WWE has turned babyface by leaving an abusive stable. No, only this year.
Yeah!
Angles wrestling has seen in decades happen when Sami Zayn left the Bloodline. What made this one so perfect?
This right here will make the Bloodline storyline more interesting to bring in the face fans like myself. 'Cause for a while, that whole thing was so one-sided. It's like there's no room for a face fan to get into it. But when Sammy did it, Kevin Owens in on it. Now we got Cody Rhodes in on it and Riddle back in on it. You gotta love it now. Now the Bloodline story is not one side. It's sided for the heel who rolls with the bitch line, while the faces roll with the guys who are against the bitch line, such as Sammy, KO, and Riddle, and Cody Rhodes, and many others will too. But yes, and hopefully see either Jay or Solo break away from it though, or it could be surprisingly Jimmy. Who knows? And finally see the crumbling of the tribal queen. But let's keep going.
Well, it was partially because it had been so long since something this good happened in Vince McMahon's promotion. Fans of the company had almost forgotten what it felt like.
It did.
It all started the prior year when, after gradually working his way into a position of honorary oos of the heel stable, Zayn won over the hearts of fans everywhere. And that was because, with him being so childlike in his naivety and desire to please his tribal chief, it became nigh on impossible for anyone to boo him. Hell, even his biggest detractor, Jey Uso, eventually came to love him. But as the weeks and months went on and Roman Reigns started asking more and more of his underling, you could see Sammy growing increasingly uncomfortable. Sure, he was loyal to the cause, and felt like he had to continually prove this. That said, one line he wasn't as willing to cross was hurting his real-life best friend, Kevin Owens. And all this reached a head at the 2023 Royal Rumble, as there, being asked to lay out a defenseless KO, the Quebec native decided he couldn't follow this path anymore, and instead nailed Reigns with a chair shot
Woo!
to the back,
Loved it.
all to one of the most guttural
Yes.
pops in years.
Oh man, just go back to that moment. I just want to see that little. Hold on, go back.
Nailed Reigns with a chair shot to the back, all to one of
Yes. Loved
the
it.
most
Loved
guttural
it
pop.
right there. The little tribal bitch throwing it down on the ground. Yes, love it so much. I would scream my heart on this one.
In years. Yes, it was perfect and easily the best face turn in WWE since Daniel Bryan's almost a decade prior. And sure, you could argue over whether or
boo
not
that
what
man.
came next at Elimination Chamber was the right decision, but even if you feel the company dropped the ball there, it's impossible to deny that for one night at the Royal Rumble, everything came together
They
to
kind of
create
dropped
an
the ball in
all-time
WrestleMania
great
somewhat.
moment. That said, even this isn't the only example of someone leaving a heel stable behind and having a legendary face turn in the process. No, way back in 2002, only months after returning to WWE, Hulk Hogan was doing the same thing when he dropped the NWO and went back to the red and yellow. But this
He
was
had
never
to.
meant to happen, though. No, after signing up Hogan, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash in February of that year, Vince McMahon's plan had been to redo the New World Order angle and have them run roughshod over the company as a heel trio. Once WrestleMania 18 took place, however, plans changed, as there, despite being in the ring with The Rock, the fog of nostalgia saw the majority of fans turn on the Great One in favor of the Hulkster during the two's legendary showdowns. So calling an audible, once the match was over, the boss sent Hall and Nash to the ring with instructions to turn on Hogan. And in doing so, it meant The Rock would come to his aid and officially inaugurate the 5-time WWF
I
champion
think they didn't want the Rock fans to turn Rock fully.
back over to the side of the good guys. But that wasn't the end of the whole thing, because the next night on Raw, now a babyface once more, the Hulkster came out to the ring and received a 10-minute long standing
He
ovation.
did, man.
And with this proving to management they'd made the right decision, they
And to
continued.
my opinion, to me, this version of Hulk Hogan was my favorite version of Hulk Hogan. I know the iconic little each shade of praise vitamin Hogan was iconic, but to me, I love this Hogan right here. This was like near dear to my heart though, because he was the Hulk red, but he was like a little bit of the cool NWO though persona, but as a babyface though as well too.
Continue to ride the nostalgia train, with this even seeing Hogan become the undisputed world champion when he beat Triple H for the title the next month at Backlash. Of course, he'd lose this back to The Undertaker soon thereafter, as even Hulkamania had its limits by this point in time. But it didn't stop Hogan from continuing to fill up a prominent role on the card for the next while yet, as he helped to get younger stars
Yes,
such as
indeed.
Randy Orton and Brock Lesnar over to the next level. But what of the yin to Terry Bollea's yang, Macho Man Randy Savage?
Ooh.
After all, while he may have been persona non grata in WWE by the time the new millennium rolled around, it should never be forgotten that years before this, in 1991, he'd had an all-time great babyface turn of his own when he reunited with the love of his life, Miss Elizabeth, at WrestleMania 7. That's right, it's often been called one of the most emotional moments in wrestling history, and that's for good reason, because if you go back and watch it now, you can actually see grown women in the audience crying. Why were they so emotional? Well, in the years leading up to the turn, Savage had spent most of his time playing a dastardly heel, one who acted more abusive towards his wife and valet than anything else. Hell, after losing the WWF title to Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 5, he'd even abandon Elizabeth and start shacking up with Sensational Sherry instead. But despite it seeming like the love story for the ages was well and truly dead by then,
our people both Lanny, Marshall and Lanny right there, man.
hope still remained, as at WrestleMania 7, when the Macho Man put his career on the line during a match with the Ultimate Warrior, his real-life lover was there in the crowd watching on. And as if this wasn't enough to prove that she still cared for him, the fact that she ran in to save him at the end certainly was. Yes, after losing to the Warrior, Randy was attacked by Sherry, with this causing Elizabeth to jump over the barricade and rescue her man. So that was why, right there in the middle of the ring, he apologized to Elizabeth, then raised her up on his shoulder as the two rekindled their love and gave the whole thing the fairy tale ending it deserved. That said, not every face turn during this period was a fairy tale. No, some were far closer to being a horror story instead. And we can say this with confidence because just 1 year later, despite being WWE's resident horror movie villain, The Undertaker decided it was time to shake things up by becoming a hero.
This was a good one.
Not that he'd changed much about his character here, though. No, he was still the undead zombie mortician, an unstoppable force who apparently felt no pain. But with fans falling in love with this gimmick despite its clear heel leanings, Vince McMahon decided to go with it and see how long it would work out for.
And it
And
did.
it's just as well he did, because as it turned out, The Undertaker would go on for a long, long time.
Yes.
And had it not been for this original refresh, the gimmick may never have made it out of the early
That's
90s
true.
at all. Basically, it all started when, after noticing how many cheers the Dead Man was getting during his feuds against the likes of Hulk Hogan, the company tried to combat this by aligning him with uber heel Jake the Snake Roberts. But when even that didn't work, it was clear what had to be done.
Yup.
So when Roberts attempted to lay out Miss Elizabeth with a steel chair in February of 1992, the Dead Man stopped him, as even for him, this was a move too far. Not being happy with that decision, however, Roberts confronted his partner a couple of weeks later and demanded to know whose side he was on, only for him to find out the answer he feared the most when The Undertaker replied, "Not yours." Yes, it may have seemed strange to some to have the big new babyface of the company be a gothic monster
Yup.
who liked to place his opponents in caskets and body bags, but the early 90s audience was all in on the idea, and
Indeed.
so, after he dispatched of Jake at WrestleMania 8, the Phenom started a lengthy run as a babyface. And during this time, not only would he become WWF champion, but he'd also have very memorable feuds against
Yes.
the likes of Mankind, Yokozuna, and Kane. Hell, at one point, he'd even fight himself at SummerSlam 1994, though, if we're being honest, that one's probably best left forgotten. Then, once he was fully established as a top guy, he'd continue to wrestle in high-profile matches all the way up until 2020. With this making him probably the longest tenured in-ring performer
Indeed.
in the company's history. Of course, not all WWE superstars can have such a lengthy run on top, though. That just wouldn't be feasible. But even if our next entry really never caught on it the same way as the Dead Man over the long term,
Oh, yeah,
it
Vincent's.
doesn't change the fact that
Or
when he finally
Virgil.
broke away from Ted DiBiase in 1991, Virgil was briefly a huge star. But how did this happen? Well, after spending years playing DiBiase's long-suffering sidekick, Virgil decided that he'd finally had enough of the abuse when at that year's Royal Rumble, he laid him out with his own $1 million title and started forging a path of his own. That said, before he could truly leave the past behind, he'd first have to beat the $1 Million Man one-on-one. And he'd get his chance to do just this at WrestleMania 7 a few months later, when, with Rowdy Roddy Piper acting as his friend and motivator, he'd score a count-out victory over his former boss. Was it as strong as a pinfall would have been? No, but it did at least mean Virgil was now the $1 Million champion. And using the momentum of this then, combined with the huge reaction he'd gotten on that night he first turned face, he spent the next few months defending the belt against all comers. After that, though, his brief time in the spotlight would come to an end as he lost the belt back to DiBiase, and from there began to slip back down the card, with him eventually exiting WWF altogether and going over to WCW to become a member of the NWO. Still, even if he didn't last in the main event scene, it doesn't take anything away from the fact that his initial turn worked out so well
It did.
because it had been quietly building for years at that point, mostly taking place in the background and allowing fans a chance to truly get invested. But can it compare to another great mid-card babyface turn which took place decades later and saw a different put-upon employee drop his boss to a huge fan ovation?
Oh.
Well, that's up for you to decide. And since we've already
Yup.
made the case for Virgil, we really should make the case for Damien
They
Mizdow too.
dropped the ball with
After
him,
all,
man.
no one would have expected Damien Sandow to get over again given how badly he'd been buried following
Yup.
his failure to successfully cash in the Money in the Bank contract in late 2013. And that was because, no longer being treated like a serious threat at that point, he'd pretty much play the role of comedy undercard act whose only TV time came when he was impersonating other, more high-profile figures like Vince McMahon,
Oh,
Bret
yeah.
Hart, or Shawn Michaels. Luckily, though, things began to turn around in mid-2014 as here, Sandow was rebranded as Damien Mizdow, the personal stunt double to The Miz. Yes, despite the role being nothing on paper, the Massachusetts native managed to get it over big time by fully playing up to its ridiculous nature. And this included mimicking every movement his client made, including taking phantom punches at ringside whenever The Miz got cracked across the face inside the squared circle. So with things soon getting to a point where audiences were chanting for Mizdow every week, The Miz began to grow frustrated over the fact that he was
Yep.
being overshadowed. And that led to conflict building between the two, which saw the so-called Hollywood A-lister start acting more and more dismissive towards his employee. Hell, things eventually got so bad that Mizdow would be relegated from stunt double to mere personal assistant. Not willing to be disrespected like that, however, the fan favorite formulated a plan to get even, a plan which he eventually executed at the WrestleMania 31 pre-show. What happened here? Well, towards the end of the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal that night, Mizdow turned on his boss when he eliminated him, all to a massive pop. That said, while this was a great moment, it ultimately fell short in the follow-up because as the weeks went on, Sandow ended up slipping back down the card and returned to the role of comedy act, now alongside Curtis Axel. But falling down the card was never going to be an option for our next subject, though, and that's because when it comes to Brock
most recent
Lesnar,
one,
whether it be as a heel or a babyface, he's always on top. Of course, most of his time in WWE since his return in 2012 has seen him be on the villainous side of the alignment chart, with the main reason for this being he's so good at playing a dominating bully, it's easy fodder for babyfaces.
To the point of holding the title hostage, with right now the current title Queef is doing right now, who ironically was calling out Brock for that time during his time as a face, which he could, was reasonable, but he's not doing the same damn thing
to go up against. Over time, however, it became apparent his formula of taking a smaller act like Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, or Finn Balor to Suplex City was starting to grow a little stale, as was his seemingly never-ending series of matches against Roman Reigns. So realizing things needed to be freshened up then, he started changing his gimmick in January of 2022 when Paul Heyman betrayed him by fully throwing his chips in with the Tribal Chief. And this change meant not only formally turning babyface, but also dropping some of the more stern aspects.
And this was low-key a double turn, if to be honest, but to be honest though.
Aspects of his character, as he instead allowed himself to have a bit more fun. How would he do this? Well, by taking a much more cowboy-like tone to the way he did things, including coming out to the ring in dusty Levi's, a plaid shirt, and a 10-gallon hat. And it's just as well he chose to go this path then because immediately afterwards, he was refreshed once more. Enough to where, when he faced off against Roman Reigns again at that year's SummerSlam, it didn't feel like a retread, but instead came across as arguably the best showing the two ever had together. Yes, part of the reason for this was because of an absolutely insane spot when the ring was tipped over with a digger truck, but had Brock not turned babyface by that point and allowed himself to be embraced by the audience once more, it's likely he would have never come up with such a crowd-pleasing idea in the first place. And with his cowboy gimmick still having plenty of juice left in it, it means we likely haven't seen the end of the cartoon chaos he can bring to the ring.
Unfortunately, this was made before, I'm guessing this was made before what happened on the couple weeks of Raw. Because he's not that cartoon comic anymore, but still.
Said, one person we sadly won't be seeing any more of is a man who, despite dying at the young age of 46, was able to build such a grand legacy for himself, he's still considered one of the all-time GOATs to this day, and that's Andre the Giant. As for his great face turn though, well, it wouldn't come until late in his career when he was already effectively retired. But then there was little opportunity for him to turn before this anyway, as between the mid-60s and the late 80s, he largely played the role of fan favorite everywhere he went. Of course, this would change during the lead-up to WrestleMania 3, when Andre turned heel on Hulk Hogan, and from there demanded a shot at the WWF title. And while he wouldn't win his match when it came, his new shift in character would remain, as over the next 3 years, he continued to be on the side of the villains. That's right, whether it was working with the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase to screw the Hulkster out of the world title in 1988, or feuding with Jake the Snake Roberts in 1989, there was no talking sense into the Giant, as by now, he'd fully turned his back on the fans. But when in 1990 he realized his time in the ring was finally coming to an end, he apparently had a change of heart, because at that April's WrestleMania 6, after he and Haku lost the tag team titles to Demolition, something shifted in his mind. Sure, this shift was helped along by the fact that Bobby Heenan had slapped him across the face after the bell rang, but it wasn't just that, because seeing how much the fans were still behind him even in defeat, Andre realized that he should have been fighting for them all along. So that was why he proceeded to do just this as he sent both the Brain and Haku packing. And his decision here couldn't have come at a better time as it happened, because unbeknownst to him or anyone else, he didn't have many years left. In fact, just 3 years later, Andre would tragically die of a heart attack. And even after his untimely death, Andre's face turn will continue to be talked about for decades as one of the all-time greats, much like each of the others we've looked at today.
Yeah, good little video right here on the good guys for World 2, man. And he got some good picks for some great picks for face turns as well too, though. It could be some other ones definitely that could be added in World 2, such as The Rock's face turn, John Cena when he turned face, and a good amount of others though too. But these picks was definitely some great picks though, for sure. Other than that, if you like my reaction, like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And who is currently heel right now that you would love to see? Oh yeah, I've got to add Seth Rollins' face turn as well too. Was pretty awesome though. But who's that's currently heel right now that you would love to see as to have a face turn as well too? Right now, I would like to see. I know she's doing this undefeated thing with the TBS channel and everything, but hopefully down the line, I'd like to see a face run from Jade Cargill. I got one from Tasha Steelz right now going on in Impact. Though I haven't followed up with Impact. She's turned face recently. Carmelo Hayes, I think he's turning face. He's face right now. He did turn face, or he's on the verge of it. He's a tween right now, but he's going to turn face as well too. Who else is currently heel that I would like to see turn face? I definitely like to see Powerhouse Hobby at face 1.12. But and this one right here, it knows probably gonna be God knows whenever this is ever gonna happen. Probably gonna take years because he's so in love with this heel run so much that he say he never will ever turn back. But as Undertaker say, never say never. If the Tribal Chief ever turn back face, then and only then I will acknowledge him. But other than that, if you like my reaction, like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's your boy T-Bird signing off. One love.